Now, this first story is a good spooky witch story called Jenny Badfinger. Back in the late 1800s in lower eastern West Virginia, way back in the sticks, there was an old woman named Jenny that everybody feared. They say she was a short lady, poor as dirt, and rarely spoke. But when she did, everybody listened. She lived by herself, except for a ton of crows that followed her everywhere she went. No matter where she was, crows would litter the ground and the tops of buildings. Jenny would rarely come into town because she knew how to work the land, and she had the mountains surrounding her old cabin. But when she did, folks kept their distance and wouldn't dare look her in the eye. What got that started is one day, several years before, she'd come into town to trade some spices and herbs for some flour at a lamp oil. She rarely spoke and would point with her left finger. She always kept her right hand covered by cloth and a lengthened sleeve. When she'd leave the general store, a boy born to a wealthy family run into her, knocking everything out of her arms and spilled her flour. She just stared at the boy. Well, his daddy seen it and screamed at Jenny, saying, "You need to watch where you're going, old woman. You better be glad you didn't hurt my son." Old Jenny, she snapped. Them old crows started crowing like crazy as she eased up to the boy's daddy and lifted her right hand, revealing a long, twisted, bony, and gnarled up finger, much longer than any of her other fingers. She said in a raspy yet unsettling, calm voice, "If you ever so much as even speak to me again, Ned Barham, your words shall rot out of your mouth." When he started to say something, he began to cough and grab at his throat. His tongue was swelling out of his mouth. Startled, the boy picked up her stuff for her. Well, people ran over to him as she was walking away. The further she got, the more the swelling went down. Hence the name, Jenny Badfinger. One day, a man showed up at her cabin and was trying to steal one of her chickens. He caught it and was about to run with it when the back door opened. As he was running by, he stopped dead in his tracks. He said, "What do you think you're doing?" He said, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'm just starving." Again, your belief to ask a body for a bite to eat? No, ma'am. Just easier to steal it, ain't it? She fed the gentleman, and he later told everybody that as he was leaving, she pointed her bad finger at him. Said her eyes turned gray, glossed almost like a corpse's eyes. It said, "If you ever steal from another, you'll not grab nary another thing." Said later on, he must have stole again. And true to her word, the man's hand was drawn up, curled, to where he could barely even dress himself. A local man and woman visited her one day. Asked her if she had bewitched her cattle and stock. She said, "Weren't my doing. There's more than one of my kind in these parts. I just don't like to hide like the rest of them." Said he tipped his hat and bid her good day. And as they was walking off, the lady noticed seemed what looked like a grave. She asked, "Well, who's buried there?" Jenny said, "Nobody yet. They say that old Jenny lived to be 102. Said when she was found, she was laying in that hole that was dug. Said a simple note was in her hand. It said, 'Cover me up and feed my babies.' Said the entire property, house, ground, trees, and everything was littered with cawing crows. Said all the locals come together and fed them for days till they slowly stopped coming around. But they say that even to this day, people have seen crows cawing quite often. And when they look, they'll get a glimpse of old Jenny's ghost roaming the woods."
There was an old witch woman they called Granny Blackteeth. She lived back in a holler there in an old house. This old woman said that the land was hers to do as she saw fit and cursed it. Not even a single critter would go near that land, except for crows. That land there was littered with crows. The trees and plants started dying. Folks said she conjured up all kinds of crazy things out there. But those old things wouldn't dare leave the holler. Now, story goes, a man named Chester Brooks was traveling one day when it got dark and he got lost there. He accidentally wandered into her holler and made camp. He ate some of his rations and thought that the place just didn't feel right. After he ate a bite, he figured he'd try to find his way out of that place because it just radiated evil. He stood up, gathered his stuff, and then old Granny Blackteeth leaned out from behind a tree and asked, "What you doing on my land, Chester Brooks?" This just scared him half to death. One thing was the fact that she knew his name. The other was how she looked. She had sort of a lace-like material draped over her head of old white stringy hair that stuck out underneath it everywhere. She was wearing an old tattered nightgown, and a raggedy old blanket was draped over her shoulders. But what got him the most was her skin looked like dried, cracked clay. And it seemed like she had black goo around her teeth. And he wouldn't forget those eyes. They were dark, hollow eyes. He screamed and grabbed his Bible from his bag. He closed his eyes and began praying. And the next thing he knew, he fell asleep. Now, when he came to, it was the next day, in early morning, and he was just outside the nearest town. He never knew just how he got there. He told a few people in town what happened. They said, "Oh, that was old Granny Blackteeth."
Years ago, there was an old farm woman named Minnie Vanickle that everybody said was a witch in our neighborhood. She lived on a curve in the road in a rundown farmhouse and had 2 barns and a shed on her property. I remember riding down the road at night with my folks when I was a kid, and as the car would approach the bend in the road where she lived, the headlights would illuminate her front porch, and sometimes she'd be sitting on the porch glaring at us as we went around the bend. I once asked my great aunt Jane about her, and she bluntly replied, "She's a witch." Another time I asked an old farm widow in our neighborhood about her. Now, this woman was a highly Christian woman, and when I asked her if Minnie was a witch, she hesitated, but she did reply with, "Well, she has done some strange things," and that's all she said. Her land was once farmed by her husband, but before he died, he sold off all the farm ground to a man named Nicholson. But he kept the house, barns, and about 6 acres of his land. Nicholson, who was one of them fellers who had a lot of money, and he bought up land to eventually develop it into houses. However, he never moves fast, and sometimes it's years before he does anything with the ground he buys. For instance, I used to squirrel hunt on his land, and today there's a big fancy home right where I used to sit and shoot gray squirrel. Well, apparently, even though Minnie no longer owned the farm ground, she would still try to run people off of it. I've heard men talk of being back in her woods early of a morning waiting for the squirrels to start moving, and almost as if she come out of nowhere, Minnie would be standing there glaring at them and pointing with a bony finger and would tell them, "Get off my land." Nicholson tried talking to her, but didn't do no good. She continued to harass hunters and root diggers right up till she died. She told Nicholson, You'll never get to use my land for anything, Jim Nicholson. I'll see to it. When Minnie died, somebody burned down her house. And later somebody came, burned down the barns and sheds. Nothing's left but a crumbling spring house down by the slope from her former home. When she died having no heirs, her 6 acres come up on tax sale, and a man named Doherty bought it, and to this day has done nothing with the property. So in the years after Minnie's death, her former farm began to spring up pockets of marshy ground. No one had an explanation for it, but year after year the ground became more swampy and worthless for anything but hunting. Then over the years it even become difficult to hunt in. And here and there in the growing swamp, you can find a deer stand that now sits out in the water, still attached to a tree. The place is now just home to muskrats, raccoons, bobcats. About the only thing it's good for now is for trapping. Being a trapper, I asked Nicholson for permission to trap it, which he granted. He just gave me a warning to watch for the sinkholes and quicksand. The first year I trapped it, I did pretty good, but he was right about them sinkholes. I once found a muskrat lodge built over what looked like a deep sinkhole, so I cut a pole and ran it down in the water. I went down at least 8 foot and couldn't touch bottom. Twice I broke through the surface and sunk up to my knees, and was luckily both times to have a partner trapping with me. One of the creepiest things was finding fence posts sticking up out of the swamp fence wire, still stapled to it. The land certainly had a gloomy air to it, and it still does to this day. What made me finally quit trapping, the place was, it weren't lack of critters, nor the swampy ground. It was the handprints. One morning I headed back in the swamp to check my traps, and noticed a white handprint on a tree where I'd went in. More than that, as I followed my line, I began to notice more handprints on more trees. I didn't touch them, but it seemed to be some sort of powder. Well, this kept on, and it spooked me. I figured somebody was watching me, so one morning I entered the swamp at a point where I'd never gone into. The next morning, there was white handprints on the trees in an obscure place I had entered. That was enough for me. I quit trapping right there, and won't enter that place no more. I took some photos from around the place, but I'll never set foot in that swamp again. Old Nicholson is gone now, and his son owns the ground. He says it's a worthless piece of property to him, and it's been classified as a wetland, so it can never be used for anything except waterfowl and maybe the critters that live in it. And just maybe the spirit of a witch who to this day will not let anybody use her land.
Here's one my brother-in-law told me about from his mail route near Wytheville, Virginia. His co-workers told him shortly after he started to watch out delivering mail near the old witch's house. It's rumored that a lot of weird stuff happens near there. The other mailmen do not want that route, and it always falls on the new guy to take that route, and this fell on him. The story is that about 15 or so years ago, a lady that lived there was kind of a hermit and kept to herself. Even back then, people didn't want to go and deliver mail and stuff to her because they said she was a witch, and she would sneak up on anyone that came by and chase them off. They also said that people and animals would go missing near that house, never to turn up again. Well, eventually she passed away. And about a year later, there was a huge storm from a hurricane similar to the one we had just recently here. All the houses in the area were damaged except for that witch house. It was still in perfect condition. And then 10 years later, after being abandoned all that time, it looked exactly the same. To this day, no one wants to go near that place. There's rumors that the spirit of the old lady will show up and run off anybody that comes near. Now, my brother-in-law has delivered this route for years, and he says that any time he has to go near that house, it feels like there's a million eyes just watching him every single day. He just wants to get out of there.
Now, I recently got talking to some of our elders from Alabama. One who was 101 year old and still had a memory that's as sharp as a tack. Well, they got to tell me some Hank stories and things. And one about a mountain witch that was so powerful, said folks was too scared to even let her name pass across their lips. Now, these folks knew her name, but said I didn't want to know it, and I agreed with them. Because they said the last person they recalled that ever said her name woke up the next morning with boils and blisters and sores all over their mouth and tongue. But now, said all the local folks back in, said they all knowed her as Old Rags, because she always wore a cloak-looking thing and looked like it was just, sewn together with just old rags. Said she was kind of a short woman, and boy, said she just radiated evil. But now they said that, a lot of their family knowed her family. They said when she was a little bitty gal, she was sweet as honey. Always played with the other gals and things. Just pretty as a doll. Well, when she got older, she fell in love with a feller and done everything under the sun for him, waited on him hand and foot, done everything to make him happy. And he took her heart and shattered it by leaving her for her cousin. Well, said that sent her in a fit of rage, and said she just couldn't take the pain from him. So she went to see an old witch. Said the old witch told her that she couldn't give her his love back, but she could offer her revenge. Now, I reckon it weren't long after that, her cousin and that feller's hair, teeth started falling out. Just anything bad you could think of started happening to him. The folks around town would laugh at him, stuff like that. Old Rags, she was mighty happy with that outcome. But she wanted to be able to do things like that herself. So she asked that old mountain witch to teach her, and she learned from her. But that weren't good enough. No, she didn't stop there. Said she sold everything she had or get her hands on to travel. Said she even went to the old countries and sought out some of their most powerful witches and learned from each one of them. Then she heard about a woman who was mighty powerful with a magic called Voodoo. And she even went and learned some from her. Then she started mixing the crafts. But then she started changing. Said she was a different person altogether. Said even her eyes turned from a deep blue to an icy gray. Said her hair started turning from black to white. Wrinkles ate her up. Said when she was 40, said she looked 90. Said she lived down at the end of a holler. Said about a quarter mile after the last homestead for hers. Said the trees looked dead. Weren't no grass that would grow, flowers, and even weeds. It was just dirt. Looked like a wasteland. They said she'd sit with her front door open Sat in an old rocking chair just inside the doorway and looked out. There weren't nothing unusual. See her stop like a wild animal. If she was walking by somewhere and start smelling the air. And sometimes she'd do that and just start laughing and then turn and go back in the way she was coming or just veer off through the woods. And, young as being young'uns, a teenage boy was trying to impress a gal once. And said he was gonna go stand in front of her house and chuck a rock at it. They said to this very day, they don't know exactly what he's seen or what happened. They said that boy come walking back up the road, white-headed, mouth gaped open, and for the rest of his days, said he just sat and stared at nothing, said oftentimes screaming out top of his lungs. Sometimes folks have to come together and hold his arms and legs down, because he'd go into fits. One day they said she just up and just left the area, so nobody knowed where she went. But some folks believe, well, she was so powerful, she's still alive to this very day.
Deep in the woods of Appalachia, passing old war-ravaged towns, there's a cemetery on top of a hill with an abandoned yet old church lost to time. All that remains is 4 brick windowless walls covered in graffiti and vines. The roof is barely hanging on. This place is where an old Appalachian witch named Joyce Bishop did vile things. This place is riddled with horrible slavery history where runaway slaves met their end. Joyce Bishop performed rituals inside of the shell of a church. She sacrificed innocent animals in a hole in the concrete floor, paying tribute to evil spirits or even the devil himself. When she passed, she was buried in the cemetery there. When night comes, she roams the cemetery looking for trespassers to run off. Only she can use this place as her own. It is told that she will appear to you, telling you that you don't belong here and to leave this place now. Then she runs to you, disappearing just before she gets to you. As you walk through the cemetery, you can feel like someone's following you or touching you, even breathing down your neck. So when you're out in Appalachia, you better know where you're at. Great day in the morning. Those were some creepy Appalachian witch stories. Oh my gosh. I don't know what it is with these Appalachian witch stories, but ooh, give me the chills. Every time I hear these stories, there's some great ones. Did y'all have a favorite? I kind of lean towards Jenny Badfinger, because what she did to that poor old dude's hands, the thief. Either that or that father whose son bumped into her, tongue swelled up, I think it was. Another creepy one is the one I told that was told to me by my brother-in-law, just because it's so close to me. Just think, I mean, and that's a recent one too. A lot of these are stories that have been passed down from family member to family member. Maybe they were tales to, get kids to be nice to outsiders in the community, or maybe there was a speckle of truth in them. It's hard to say, without being there, but it makes you wonder. I hope y'all enjoyed these. I love putting out a bunch of Appalachian witch stories and spooky ghost stories around Halloween, and Halloween is upon us. I can't wait. I always get so excited this time of year, and I hope to give y'all a ton of good stories for this month, but this will be the first. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this video and this is your first time listening. Or if you're a repeat offender, why hadn't you subscribed yet? And if you've got a story like this or some kind of spooky story you'd like to send in, you can email it at spookyappalachia@gmail.com. I hope y'all have a good night and you can sleep after hearing these. But until next time, don't forget, stay spooky.